Welcome to the show, Mind Matters, where your mind matters, the podcast for love, life, and learning. I'm your host, Nate Shear, and we have a very special guest today named Laura. The reason I wanted to start this podcast was to focus on mental health and make sure other people have resources and really get past the stigma of being able to talk about it. It feels like no one can ever talk about it to their friends and family, and that's why we're going to have discussions here and make it more normal. So when I first started the podcast, I did what I know how to do, is to reach out to other people that do things and they do them well to try to figure out how to get started. So I reached out to Josh White. He's the podcast host of Hero Front. I didn't really honestly think he's going to reach me back at all because he does have the #1 military podcast of the year. He is very successful and has many different episodes, but of course he did. He's super cool, great guy. So he reached out to me. We tried to meet up one weekend, but with the time zones, we had some challenges. And the next weekend, we were actually able to meet up, which was great. And one of the questions I had was, what's important in the podcast? Is it important how big the guests are? And I thought you had to have big, giant guests, and that was the only way you could be successful. Because on Josh's podcast, he had Chief Bass and General Goldfein and some huge names, and so it pulls in a lot of viewership. But on the spot, Josh, being the great guy he is, looks at the top 10 episodes he had for the year. And sure enough, his dad was on there, which was the very first podcast. That one was #1 in viewership just based on how long it had been out there. And General Goldfein was also in that top 10 because of the starship that goes along with him. But what was really cool was 2 or 3 of the stories were just really great stories by people that were not necessarily known. And so that was really great to hear from someone that already had a successful podcast. It's about the story, it's about the people, not necessarily their rank or where they fit into the structure. So that was really great. And so once I heard that, I knew I needed to hear some really good stories. And I stumbled across this great story from Laura, which super excited to get into. So Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your origin story.
My origin story. Hey, I'm Laura. Thanks for having me today, Nate. I was born in the Philippines. I'm a military brat. I'm not Filipino at all. I was just lucky enough to be there at the time. And just grew up military, moved around a lot every couple of years, really enjoyed it. And I don't know, I got a kid who was just absolutely wonderful. So I love being a mom and just enjoy life. And, you know, just great opportunities have landed me here today. So
that's awesome. So we'll transition into the warm up in all sports. Got to stretch, got to warm up, got to get ready. So we're going to move into the warm up. What are the first few section?
All right, Nate, what is your favorite meal?
My favorite meal is anything that brings people together. So I love people and I love food. I probably love food more than I should, but luckily I'm in the military, so they make me work out. But I'd have to say probably Mexican. I love all things tacos, tortillas, burritos, all those fun things. I love a good bowl of chips and salsa in front of you and all the relationships and everything that gets pulled together as you're sitting there enjoying good, tasty food at the table.
I can't agree with you more. Mexican's really good too. All right. What does mental health mean to you?
Mental health means to me, I think it's just taking care of yourself and taking care of your mind. I think it's something we don't do very well. We do a very good job at taking care of the human body. We break a bone, we have a cast, we have a way to set it and send someone home. We send them home with Motrin, we take care of them. We follow up in a couple weeks and make sure that healing takes place. But for some reason, since mental health is more silent and more in the background, we don't get to that as much. It's not in the foreground, which is one of the main focuses of the podcast, is being able to talk about these things and get them out into the open. And I'm really excited for that. I was really hesitant to start the podcast because of not having a perfect recording, or I'm going to say or mess things up. But I think that's a good thing that plays into this mental health. Lives aren't perfect. The podcast isn't going to be perfect, but it is going to be good stories, good serious stories of people that have led lives that had challenges and hiccups, but they've bounced back from those things. So we just really need to do a better job of being proactive and being able to talk through things related to mental health. Your health should be your overall health. So, from your feet to your head, so all the way through your brain and your heart and all the things that go along with that. So mental health should be, taken just as seriously and addressed just as much as your regular human body.
All right. No, that's really great. What are your favorite mental health resources? Do you have any?
My favorite mental health resource isn't a book or podcast or anything like that. Really just people. I think that you really have to have people that you trust and are able to talk to. At my first base, I had a good friend, my best friend. We in process the exact same day. And so we went through all the challenges of that first year of commissioning. And one of the things we used to do is go over to Starbucks, which didn't have an operational drive-through. So we had to jump out of the car and go over there. But I love that, not only because I love coffee, which I do really love coffee, but it wasn't about the coffee or the tea. It was just about that, fellowship, being able to talk with each other, bounce ideas off each other, vent, which I think is super important. So I think those are two things you have to have. You have to have a sounding board to bounce ideas off of to somebody and say, hey, does this make sense? I'm feeling a whole bunch of emotions and this would be my initial reaction. What do you think? And having that unbiased person really helps, because when you're caught up in it, you could be hasty and make some decisions that aren't necessarily very good. But the sounding board gives you a pause and, hey, did you look at it from this angle, which is really good. So that's that first aspect. And the second is just the vent, just being able to word vomit, get everything out, and then walk away feeling a little bit better. And I think that's one thing that's important to distinguish with your trusted friend. Am I presenting something that I need a solution to? So I need you to give me ideas, or I'm about to just pour out here. And when we leave the car, that's it. Like, don't talk to me about it again. I don't need to hear anything about it, because I think that's important to either, hey, I need you to follow up in a couple weeks and see how that decision played out, or I'm just pouring out right now. So that's my number one mental health resource is people. And in those two aspects, the vent or the sounding board for, an unbiased reason person. Okay, Laura, how are you doing for real?
For real. I am doing well. Happy and healthy and blessed, and just keeping busy with different things. I started writing a book. It was one of my COVID activities. So it's very slow, but I'm getting there. At least I'm trying. And also I started a new hobby, doing designing and everything, and learning sublimation, and just doing that on the side just for funsies for myself, not like a side hustle or anything like that. But I just enjoy it. So that's what I'm doing now.
That's awesome. What's the book about?
The book is actually about my life in the military, not the stuff that we're talking about today, just my general, what I've gone through as a military brat and the experiences I've gone through. And, I was at this location when I was younger. So it's just like coming back 20 years later as the active duty member and just kind of seeing the places, driving down the road and base housing and seeing like where my first kiss was when I was 13 and all those things. And it's just really exciting to see all those things again. So it's just stuff like that, seeing the perspective of an Air Force brat to active duty member.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to write a book. It just seems so daunting. You see books that are published that are 200 or 300 pages.
Yeah.
What are you doing to kind of keep on that track and move forward? Do you have a weekly goal, or how do you progress through writing the book?
And again, progressing very slowly at this point. But basically, I just went online, just did some Googling and YouTubing and Pinteresting, and just got, okay, what are the first steps? You want to figure out your story, build your timeline, and then just getting the words in. And since it's my own experiences in my own life, it is a little bit easier, but at the same time, I'm trying to be really limited and not blab too much about my whole life too. So, but just being able to tell the story, and just sitting down, that's the hardest part, is just actually sitting down and actually doing it, because life is just so busy and keeping you occupied with everything else. So yeah, that's the hardest part.
That's great stuff. I'm glad you found some things to keep you busy and, keep your mind active. What habits do you have to take care of your mental health?
My habits are taking breaks. It can be as simple as just, stopping whatever you're doing and going and getting a cup of coffee and just being alone for a few minutes. Some days, if it's just really a difficult moment, and just going and sitting in the vehicle, like in your vehicle, and just blasting some music, whether you're driving or not, it can just be sitting in the car, just blasting some tunes. I find that always really helpful for me. And just, even talking with friends or that type of thing, it's just like, hey, I need a moment. Can I vent? Same as you, that type of thing. So those are the ways I do mental health breaks.
Yeah, definitely. A drive in the car is super beneficial, and also the right music always hits hard. Reminds me of those MySpace days.
Oh, yes.
The right song on the bio page just really tells everyone how you're feeling for the day or week. We need to bring that back. Note to Facebook. Bring back profile songs.
Yes.
Why is mental health so important to you?
Mental health is important to me simply because I'm a survivor of it myself. It's important as it's a silent killer, and people we know and trust every day are battling demons that we don't even realize until sometimes it's even too late. So I just find it really important because we don't talk about it enough, and we definitely do need to talk about it more. It's, as you said, like, it's one of those things where we go to the doctor for a broken bone or even a hurt back. You don't see that. Can't always see why your back is hurting, right? So it's just one of those things. Okay, so you go to the doctor to get that fixed. Mental health is the exact same thing. You're not going to ignore it. Something is wrong, and your body is telling you something is wrong. So there's no difference in getting medication and getting help for that. So it's important to me, and I feel like the word needs to be spread that it's okay.
Absolutely. And I'm going to continue this one a little bit on why it's so important to me. So I actually lost my grandmother to mental health and her battle that she had for many, many years. And so that's one of the reasons this podcast exists, is to, honor her and continue on. It's just something that's so interesting to me because I didn't even know until after her passing that she even struggled with that. It was such a dark and deep secret in her generation. We're still struggling with a lot of that stigma now, but it was so taboo back then that no one even talked about it. I think Grandpa knew, and maybe that was it. I come to find out later on, there was like weeks where she wouldn't get out of bed and things like that. But to us and all the other grandkids, she was so bright. She went to church and helped out with different groups and whatnot. If you broke down and you had a flat tire or something, she would fly in and come and help you out. And so it's just so bizarre to me to see the things that people are struggling with, and kind of like you said, the silent in the background type stuff where it appeared that she was doing amazing. And I remember one of the celebrity deaths that hit me the hardest was Robin Williams. That one was super difficult. So funny and so happy outwardly, but the inner demons and other things that are going on, no one else gets to see what they see. And so that's something that's super unfortunate, but it's important to me because I just want to make sure that people are able to, have those conversations and clear out the stigma. And just to touch on one last thing, I'm super bummed that my kids will never get to meet Grandma and Grandma will never get to see them. But I think one of the things that really hits me the hardest with the loss of her is the light and the energy that she brought to everybody will no longer be able to be out there. I was recently at a suicide prevention briefing from Colonel Swanson, retired, and he said that the number in research from someone that commits suicide affects between 130 and 150 people. And so we just never really think of that about that. I don't think we're like, oh, their immediate family, the people that are closest to them. But no, 130 to 150, that's a massive amount of people. All the people that she would pass on the street or go to the grocery store, or, wherever it is where, her face was lighting up the room will no longer be out there. And so that lack of light in the world really impacts me. And I think that's a big bummer. But I'm glad we're able to have some conversations.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to move into Laura's story. Might be deep, but it should be some good stuff. And, just goes to show that, one, we all go through things and have challenges throughout life. But we're going to see the buzzword resiliency, which I have tempted to not use, but it is important to talk about, and it's important to show the bounce back. So we use it all the time, but I don't think that necessarily should mean that it lessens its impact. There is times that are bad, and there is times where things get better. So Laura, can you kick us off on your timeline?
Oh, absolutely. First off, I do want everyone listening in that this does talk about depression and suicide. So that this is going to get a little bit deep and a little bit dark. And but just stay with me. I'm here at the end of the day, and it's a happy ending. So just stick with us, okay? So starting with my story, where it all began is I had just PCS'd. I was a little airman, and I had just PCS'd to a new base overseas. It was my first base overseas on my own as an active duty member. In front of people, I was doing okay. I was having a great time. I was making friends. I was going to work. I was thriving at work. I was doing really well. But as soon as I was alone, that's when the demon started to get to me. I would sit in my dorm room and just be upset. And then every day I just noticed that I was more and more alone, choosing to be by myself. And I would just have the TV on and just lay in my bed and not move during the weekends. And just Monday through Friday was the only time I went to work. And then I would just come back home and just hide and cry, basically. So, I would just get to the point where this was just kind of slowly killing me, and I couldn't stand it anymore. And on the weekends, I moved on to started drinking, and because that made me feel a little bit better, because I was drinking so much on the weekends that I didn't have to be in my own body. I would drink so much that I would constantly be blacked out. So there are a lot of times that a lot of weekends I don't remember, unfortunately. I was pretty good about it at first, but then it started to get worse and worse with the drinking, and I ended up so bad that luckily some female airmen would come and see that I was in a bad spot and take me back to their dorm rooms because they didn't know where mine was or didn't know how to get into my dorm room. And I would wake up in random dorm rooms. And that's where I'm really lucky that it was always females. And even though I was putting myself in a really bad situation that could have been really bad results, I luckily had those women that took care of me, even though I was making these terrible decisions. Yeah.
So with all that going on, being a younger airman, and going through all that, I'm curious what the other people had talked to you, or were you drinking more by yourself, or was it seen as like cool because everyone's going out, it's fun, YOLO, we're just going to have fun while we're young? What was that kind of atmosphere that allowed it to keep happening?
To get that far, at first it was just a bunch of us airmen that were just going out drinking and stuff, and then nobody had talked about it yet. And this story, it goes from as soon as I got to that base overseas, it was just like real quick. This is only in a 2-month span. So this all just downhill very quickly. So I think after 2-3 weeks, I started slowly drinking, and it just got worse. And it didn't seem, to answer your question, it just, everybody else was kind of drinking and being silly. We're all just hitting up the E Club, and then we would all walk home together when it closed, and some of us would continue the party, some of us would end up home, that type of thing. So I don't think anyone really noticed how much I was drinking, because it was only on the weekends. But yeah, so it was a little bit of a scary time. Yeah. But as time progressed, I was starting to lose some sleep, and I wasn't sleeping at all, and to a point where I was just kind of, I don't want to say hallucinating, but things were kind of weird. I would look at a poster and it would look like it's moving, that type of thing. So I went to the doctors and just went and saw my, normal provider, and he had given me some medication, did some random questions, the normal questions, are you doing okay, blah, blah, blah. And of course I just lied. I was like, yeah, I'm doing fine. I just can't sleep. And cause that's easy, if I'm hiding it from you and I'm hiding it from everybody, you're not going to know. Right. So he just gave me some medication to help me to help sleep a little bit better. And more, I just didn't care about anyone or anything. I started pushing the friends that I had made. I started pushing them away, just saying some awful things that, I could never take back. And I would just think of the most hurtful things I could say to them. After folks were able to tell me personal things, I was horrible. And I mean, to this day, I feel so nasty and disgusted by it. And I've made amends with everyone. But at the time, I wasn't well,
Do you think you did that because it's easier in your mind and at that time, it feels easier just to push away than actually have to deal with things?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. It was easier to push everyone away because I felt so worthless that I wanted everyone else to know that I was worthless, if that makes any sense. Because I was just like, I am worthless. I am nothing. Why do you want to be friends with me? Like, here I am. I'm going to be awful to you because these are the same things that I'm saying to myself every single day. So it's just like, you don't want to be near me. So I'm going to push you away. It's going to be about me.
Okay.
Yeah. So after pushing everybody away, and then after I lost everyone, I started thinking about suicide. And the thought of suicide was just like, oh, okay. That's the way to go. And I actually started to feel a little bit better just kind of thinking about suicide. Like, I didn't want to be on this planet anymore. And so suicide was my way of like, okay, unaliving myself is the way to go. It's the only way to stop this hurt. It's the only way to stop this pain. It's the only way to have everyone to stop hating me, because I'm just not worth being on this planet anymore. Mm-hmm. So I started daydreaming, felt better by that time. Time was going by. Things still weren't getting any better. I finally decided to make some moves. I was finally going to commit suicide. So after a week or two of just idolizing it, how am I going to do it? Am I going to take a bunch of medications? Am I going to hang myself? Am I going to jump off a building? I would just sit there and think of all these different ways of doing it. And I never wanted to ruin anybody else's life. So I was very careful. But I wanted to not inconvenience anyone. So I started packing up my dorm one night. And as I was packing up my dorm, it was packed up so that this box goes to my family, this goes to donation, that type of thing. I was really planning it out. All of a sudden there was a knock on my door, and that knock, I went over and opened it, and it was my friend Jake. Jake was somebody I was close with and was awful too. And for whatever reason, he just felt something wasn't right. He came to my door. I could not look at him in the eye. And he asked me, he goes, "Are you thinking of hurting yourself or harming yourself?" And again, couldn't even look at him in the eye. I just broke down crying. And I was I'm sure it wasn't very loud. I felt like I was yelling, but I'm sure it was just a little yes. And I just wanted to kill myself. And so he was like, all right. So he sat there with me. He relaxed with me as I try to calm myself down. And, he just stayed with me until I was just calm enough. And he goes, okay, let's go get you help. So Jake took my medication that I was using for sleeping, because that's the way I was going to try, So he took those medications away from me and took me over to go seek some help from mental health. And that was a really big moment. And yeah, that was the start of my recovery, basically. So once I got to mental health, I talked to a provider, and I was an open book with him, because at this point I'm already at rock bottom. If this doesn't work, then I have a way out. I have a plan, and nobody's going to stop me from this plan. So I just told him I was, the doc looked at me and he gave me some suggestions, and he goes, here are your options at this point right now. He goes, you can either go down, or you can have back to your dorm and you can have an NCO just hang out with you for the next 72 hours. They will watch your every move, basically. And it was just like, watch you go to the bathroom, shower, sleep, eat, whatever it is, they are going to be by your side and watching you like a hawk. And my mind is like, ew, no thanks. I don't want some random individual watching my every move. And then not only that, like, who are they? Am I inconveniencing them by taking them away from their families or anything like that? So he goes, the other option is you can check into this hospital down in London. It was a civilian hospital. It was in a foreign country, right? We're in the UK. And he goes, you can go check in that hospital. So I was like, fine, I'll go do that. I'll be out of here. Obviously something isn't right here. Let's go to London. Right. So, once I opted for the hospital, we drove down in a taxi. They grabbed an NCO that had gone with me. Bless her. She was so uncomfortable with the situation. She's just being called in. Hey, you're going to take this airman down to London in a taxi, and she's going to go to this hospital for a little bit. And I felt really bad. I felt guilty about everything. I was inconveniencing everyone with my sob story. And so she went along with me down to London. She dropped me off. She tried to comfort me in the car, but it was just a very silent ride. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was just miserable. Finally get to the hospital. She offered. She goes, hey, do you want me to stay with you? I was like, no. I feel really bad. You just rode down in this car with me forever in total silence. And here I am like, no, you can go. And so I got to the hospital. I got checked in, spoke with the nurse and gave her all of my dark, dirty details. And the doctor came in, talked to me, had to repeat my dark, dirty details of the demons I was going through and what was happening. And he set up a course, classes for me, which were really great. They were all sorts of things. There was art therapy. There was resiliency. They had even set up for other military members because I wasn't the only one there. There were a handful of us that were all checked into this hospital. And, they were really trying to do their best because they knew that the military has a bond or a type of mentality that's just different than everyone else, right? The normal civilians or even just being in a foreign country. And so they put us in a course together where we would just have conversations and we would talk about what happened to us, what we were going through, what we were doing, those type of things. And it was just a really great group for the situation we were in. My first night in the hospital, I was on suicide watch. I was not allowed to have any privacy. I had my own room. Actually, it was super bougie, I'll be honest with you. I had the biggest room with these like princess windows. I felt like a princess locked in a castle, right? There were bars on the windows, of course, but I could go sit up and look outside and it was just gorgeous. But I had to have my door open. Was checked on every 15 minutes. They took everything, any sharp things, they went through my stuff, took away my shoelaces, that type of thing, any type of cords. They just wanted me to be safe. And looking back, I know that now. But at the time, I was just so frustrated, But yeah.
One thing I wanted to touch on real quick, again, from Colonel Swanson's briefing, I really enjoyed his briefing. He got up on stage and talked about mental health and talked about some of the darker aspects. I feel like a lot of times we do PowerPoints and we talk about the bounce back and some of those things, but not necessarily the things that are harder to hear. Mm-hmm. And so one of the stories he told was about a Marine. The Marine was having a hard time. His wife had went to the chain of command. Chain of command was like, you don't want to ruin his career, so just basically shut up. And then it kept getting worse, and she went again. They were like, really, you're going to do this to him? And then he ended up backing up into a bathtub so that he could be cleaner for everyone, and then, shot himself.
Mm-hmm.
And as that's happening, his son came into the bathroom and saw the whole incident. And so he had mentioned the likelihood, if someone has ever observed or been near a suicide, depending on how close it is, the likelihood of them committing suicide is 50 to 75% more. And so the son actually got to his 21st birthday and committed suicide. So that's something that is really, really difficult to hear, but I guess it's a good thing in a weird way to hear, because I think you had touched on a few times in there the thought of inconvenience. So we think of inconvenience, it'd be better, but those 2 points that I remember from his thing is the 130 to 150 people being impacted, and then the increased likelihood of those members actually committing suicide. So even though we might think of the inconvenience of the person riding down in the taxi, if she, then starts to internalize or have issues from the things that she saw or could have seen, I mean, that is way worse than just the inconvenience of riding down in a taxi. So not that that's a great thought to try to make it logical, but if you're trying to boil it down to just logic, anyone, I think, would rather ride in the taxi or go with you, rather than have to go to a funeral or go to these other things that are even worse than a minor inconvenience at the time.
Oh, absolutely. I think that was the whole mind process, is just like, when you're already at that point where your demons are just telling you, you are worthless, you are nothing. When you get to a point, you're just an inconvenience, no matter what you do, every single thing. So it's just like, you try your best to please other people, not please them as in, let me do whatever, but it's just what can I do to not be an inconvenience to you? Like, what can I do? Because you're absolutely right. If someone were to find me, if I had jumped off a building, how's that going to affect someone's life for the remaining of theirs? That's going to haunt their dreams. And who's going to have to clean up after that? Are they going to have the stomach for it? Those type of things. And I thought about that stuff. And I don't say this lightly. I know I'm saying it very easily, but I try to tell this story to other members who are going through a difficult time. So I've repeated this story several times. So I'm not sensitive to it anymore. So please don't think I'm not sensitive to this, but it's difficult overall, just trying to talk, just thinking about it. You just don't want to be an inconvenience to anyone.
Absolutely. And I think that's the whole point, right? So having these conversations, hopefully will just continue to change the culture, which won't happen overnight. It takes a long time to affect change, but I think if we continue to do it, it'll get better and better. Can you touch on 5 senses or 5 colors?
Oh, yeah. So, during my time at the hospital, some of the things that were happening as well, it was a little bit strange. I started having panic attacks, which I had never experienced before, and it happened before the hospital. I was having them during my time, and they would just come on by anything. I think the fire alarm in my apartment or in my dorm had gone off. And I could not move. I was terrified. I knew exactly what to do. I knew how to turn it off. I knew how to stop it. There wasn't a fire. There was no one else in the room. And I just physically could not move. I was panicking and terrified, of something that wasn't even there. Just noise. And so one of the things that one of the therapists had taught me were the 5 senses or 5 colors, and a way to pull yourself or someone else out of a panic attack or an anxiety attack or something that's going on where they're just panicking, right? One of the things are the 5 senses. So what you can do is grab a piece of candy and say here, or you as the individual, put it in your mouth, and you just go through your 5 senses. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? Feel? Those type of things. And once you're going through those, your mind kind of gets pulled away from the moment that you're stuck in and rotating that over and over and over. 5 colors does the same thing. If you don't have a piece of candy or something along those lines, you can just go, okay, find me something red in the room. So you go and you look around and you're like, oh, there's a candle over there. It's red. I bought it on this day. It smells like apples and cinnamon or whatever it is. Okay, find something orange. Orange, okay, there's some goldfish over there. Those taste really delicious. I love those. And you just go through all the colors, and slowly your mind is being pulled away from the panic and brings you back to center just a little bit, enough to pull you out of that panic attack. And that's just a quick way to kind of help yourself out of those moments. And those work for other things too. It doesn't have to be a panic attack. It can be, normal days that you're normal stressors, like, all right, reality check. Let's go through this. And it can kind of help you calm down a little bit.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good tip. Always good to have tools in the toolboxes. I think that's one thing that's important to have, because there's lots of different things that can happen. So being able to reflect back and have something that you always go to. I know we talk about muscle memory and sports and different stuff, but if we're going to start to relate muscle and sports over to, the mental aspect of it, you should have those things that you go to as you're at the free throw line. You do the same thing every time. If you start to have certain issues, you do the same thing every time. So that's good stuff. So while you were in the hospital, what would you say were your big takeaways about the things you learned about yourself?
The things I learned about myself. So big takeaway was just learning where it came from, where it started. I saw a psychiatrist, the ones that give you meds. She was wonderful. She just told me, all right, start from the very beginning, from your very first memories, and write down every major thing that ever happened in your life. And that goes with moves and stuff like that. Nothing against the military, nothing like that. I want to say being a military brat was absolutely wonderful. I want to make that very clear. But they did count that as major events in your life every time we moved. And, the passing of my grandmother, I was very young, some dark experiences I had experienced that I really don't want to get into. But, she was able to talk about them and get to the root of the problem and where this all started and where this all came from. So I learned a lot about myself in that. And then just learning how the other tools that I received in there, just by talking to other people, being around other people who are in the same position. They have different stories, but the fact that they just got to a point where they just couldn't do it anymore. I always think of resiliency as like the plate theory. I don't know. Have you ever heard of that before? The plate theory?
No.
So it's basically like if you're holding resiliency is a plate. So if you have a paper plate and you hold it with one hand and you hold it out straight, you're just holding it with your hand. And somebody comes by with a plate or big old scoop of spaghetti and meatballs, right? If you have a paper plate, what's going to happen?
It's going to all fall.
It's just going to fall right off compared to somebody who has fine china, right? Or like a beautiful plate, strong, sturdy. Even if you throw it on the floor, it doesn't shatter, right? If they throw a big pile of spaghetti on there, it's going to stay, right? So I always think of that as those plates being our resiliency tools. Some people are going to live different lives, and they aren't given those opportunities and learning what works for them and what's best for them compared to somebody who has fine china. And I went from a paper plate to fine china by just getting this help and just being open and honest about everything. I didn't hold anything back. I was like, I'm at the lowest point. What else can happen? So I was just all open and honest, and they gave me the tools that I needed to break down the big important events that happened in my life and how they affected me and how to move on from those times and from those moments. And that was the biggest takeaway I took from the hospital. Should I have gotten to the point of being at the hospital? No, I could have gotten them a little bit sooner, and I should have asked for help much sooner. And we tell people, talk to your friends, talk to your family, even if it's just a little thing. Start now versus starting later so that you don't get to that point.
That's good stuff. I really enjoy and like the example of the plate. I think a lot of times in the military, we hear the example, or the one that I remember the most is the rubber band, which is good, the bouncing back aspect of it. But I think the plate is a much better visual. And I think that goes to show that you're building up that resiliency, and it gets better each time. The paper plate turns into a couple paper plates. It turns into a wooden plate, which no one does. And then the wooden plate turns into glass or whatever. And so you get to see some of those. I think I need to use that in the future, because I know in some of my briefs with the flight, when I do my introduction brief, I talk about some of the negative things that have happened in my life. And I'm always hesitant with it. And I usually don't do it on the initial one. So I usually do the initial one, very brief overview of me so that they know who I am. And then a couple months in, I do a deeper one of more that's what happened to me, so I can start to connect with the flight. And so I'm always a little hesitant because it's kind of dark in some aspects or has a negative aspect to it. But I bring those up intentionally because I want them to know, I've had the passing of my bonus dad and my grandma and, divorce, and I struggle with the custody battle and things like that, seeing my daughter and a lot of things. And I find value in those, which sounds weird, but the value of those is to help other people. If I go through something that sucks and I never get anything out of it or can't help anything, then it just sucked to suck.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
I want it to suck, and then I help somebody later on. And kind of like you had touched on, you said it's nice to hear other people. And so that's kind of that point where I've been through a lot of different things. And so I open that up. And I specifically say, I haven't been through everything. So I'm not saying I'm going to have 100% your situation. I'll tell you how to solve it. I'm just saying, don't feel like you can't come because of, some disconnect or pedestal where like, I've got everything figured out, which is something that's a little frustrating on the officer side. I think sometimes like, people lose the element of being a human. There has to be levels of respect because of the way that the structure of the military is. So respect. But then at the same time, like, we're all human, we all experience problems and have things that are going on. So the paper plate, or the level of plate, I guess, for the resiliency is really good, because sometimes I don't think people understand, like, it sucks now, but it's going to suck now so that you can challenge or work through challenges and be able to tackle things later on. So you're building up your plates. That's good. I'm going to keep adding plates.
Yeah.
So.
Even if it's just a 50, a stack of 50 paper plates and all working together, that works too.
I think this might be a good ad for like Dixie or whatever it is. Where I'm going to show you how resilient my paper plate is.
Exactly.
That's good stuff. We're definitely going to use the paper plate later on.
That's good. That's good. I like that. All right.
So now that you have lived through it, you've experienced it, now you get the ability to reflect and look back. And so you get to show somebody that might be experiencing trouble, the hindsight or the afterthought. So what are your thoughts on, having to make it to the hospital and your experience in the hospital? Do you kind of regret having to go to the hospital?
Oh, absolutely not. I was at a place in my life where my only resiliency was paper plates. It was just one thin little paper plate that I was falling apart. And sure, over time, I probably would have hardened up and gotten a little bit better. But at that time, in that place, if I didn't go to the hospital, I would not be here today. If Jake had not come to my dorm that night, I would not be here today. And that's why, the one thing that's out there and everybody kind of rolls their eyes at is the whole ACE, right? The Ask, Care, Escort. And honestly, that's what was used. Sure, maybe the Ask and Care didn't get there, but I was new to the area. I'd only been at the unit for 2 months. So people didn't really know me that well. They just saw me as a hot mess. And by the time I got to the absolute worst, luckily he knew it was time to ask and care and just escort me there. He asked me point blank is what you have to do. You have to ask them, are you planning on hurting yourself? You have to actually care. You have to give a damn about these folks. You can't just be like, here, oh yeah, I'm fine. And when you know something is not fine. And then finally you have to escort them there. You can't be like, okay, we'll make an appointment. You have to physically go with them and just go, no, we're at a point. This is really bad. Let's get you help, and let's get you help now. And that's why it's so important to me. I don't regret any of it. With the tools that I've learned, I see the downhill spiral to where I got there. And it wasn't just I had just moved to a foreign country. I hadn't just moved to England. It was, I look back and I was like, oh, prior to this PCS, upset all the time. I was starting to cry. I was starting to sleep all the time. I was having the difficulties then. And I look further back, I had just gone through a divorce. I got in, like, started seeing someone and got engaged super quickly, and then broke that off out of nowhere because, my mind was trying to tell me, like, you can't get divorced and remarried in like such a short time. It was just like all these things that trickled down that happened way before that I would not have thought was the reason that I got to that point, to my absolute lowest. So those not little, I mean, they were big events that happened. It just kept trickling down. Then I just didn't see it until it was too late to get to that point. So
something I want to touch on real quick. I think for the first few years I was in the military, I kind of had this thought, and I think a lot of people do, is we hear ACE and we believe that if you ask directly, you are planting the thought in the member's head, which has been disputed through many different surveys and things like that. So just want to make that foot stomp here as we touch on that. You want to ask clearly and directly. At that point is not the point to beat around the bush and, well, what are you thinking about or whatnot? You just got to cut through it at that point. You are not planting any seed. That's not how it works. The member is either a firm yes or a firm no, and there's really not any gray area on that one. You're either going to cut them, straight through there for where they're going to wake up and want to go. I mean, they might not want to go, but they're going to come to that realization. You're going to help that escorting portion, but you can't ever have the thought where, well, if I say the words, are you thinking of harming or killing yourself? That is going to in turn create their thought to be able to do that. So absolutely not a thing. Not a thing.
Also, just to throw in there too, when you ask them and everything and you do escort them, don't be afraid of them being mad at you or being angry with you or being disappointed in you. You just have to suck that part up as someone who is trying to help another individual get the help that they need. Of course, they're going to be mad. You're ruining their plans. They've made this decision on how to be happy again is by not being on this planet. And so yeah, they are going to be mad at you. I was mad at Jake for a while too. You spoiled my plans. But over time, I was lucky enough to run into Jake again here when I first PCS'd here on island. And I made amends with him immediately. I met his wife. She's wonderful. She's one of my dearest friends. And, I thank him every day. He is my guardian angel who was there that night. And of course I was pissed at him at first, but now just a very important person in my life that I will always be thankful for.
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the things that's really difficult, but probably pretty core to all of mental health and the different issues is the forethought for the future. So from your standpoint, not to go too in depth here, but your thought is the here, the now. It's terrible. It sucks. I can't imagine I'm a hindrance. I'm in the way of everyone. But the down the road is the problem to be able to think about it, because if you could, you would realize it's not inconvenience. That's not the actual issue. The person might be mad for a little bit, but they're going to bounce back. So I think that goes back to probably a little bit of like the 5 senses or the 5 colors, breaking out of the panic attack. There has to be something that breaks you out of the here and now to think of your whole life. Like even if, you're in high school and high school sucks, high school's 4 years, so it's going to be over before you know it, or whatever the particular situation is. I mean, I hate to throw out this too shall pass, but that's one of those things where like things will change.
No, absolutely.
So now that you've kind of moved on, you've, many years past this situation, what are some of the things you do when you get the baddie saddies?
Oh, when I get the baddie saddies, when those come along, I try to do those mental health checks, those mental health breaks. I like to use this app. I think it's called Finch. I forget what it's called. Finch, and it's silly, but it allows me. I can go in there and I'm raising a little bird, in her little life, and I can dress her up, and she gets little pals and everything. But what it does are just daily checks. Like it gives yourself goals. You can do depression quizzes to kind of see where you're at. Same with anxiety, sleeping, anger. It's just a cute little app, where just kind of doing a self check-in. And it'll ask you happy things too. It'll just be like, hey, what's your favorite memory with mom? It'll ask those questions. And or what about like certain friends that you kind of chat into your little, like when you're putting in your little blurb about your day, it will kind of recognize different words, like special people in your life that you name in there. So if I were writing about you in there or something, it would take note of Nate. So then later on it would be like, oh, how did Nate make you feel when he told you a certain story or something along those lines? It's just a really fun little app, and it's cutesy and all that stuff, but it helps with those check-ins. And then also there's a little first aid button for when you are having a really bad time or really stressing about something. Then you can go in and just rant, or it can just go, okay, let's see how can we help? How can we get these words out? So if you're a type that likes to express yourself in texting, that's a really helpful way too. So I like that little app. So that's my way of like checking in on where I'm at, and it can rate me and be like, you're doing okay, but here, try this, maybe go for a walk, or, you can, go call a friend or set some goals for the day, do the dishes, those have been sitting there for a while. It's time, that type of thing. And tell me how you feel when you're done.
Yeah, I think this goes back to, I know it's repeating, but I think sometimes repeating is good to kind of ingrain the thought is the muscle memory, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone needs to find the thing.
Yes.
It's the vent to the friend, the journaling, writing comes up a lot. I personally don't write, but I could definitely see that being a very good thing of journaling, pen to paper, or even finger to keyboard at this point in 2023. But I think that probably is the core of, what we've talked about. There's been a lot of different thoughts, but if we're boiling it down to one thing, the muscle memory, we do it for other aspects. We do it for sports. We do it for, running, whatever it may be, but we don't talk about that as much for the mental health aspect. So you're going to write every morning, read every morning, checking on your app. That's great stuff. So that's good. I like that. I think that's important. We're going to transition into final thoughts. So what are your final, 3 or 4 things that are going to help close us out here?
All right. I'm kind of pretty much just repeating myself, but, I am thankful every day that I'm here. I am so lucky to be here. I have gotten my second life, and I'm so happy. I also want y'all to just make sure that you're checking in on your friends, even if they're happy. Just make sure, just do that double check. Like you said with Robin Williams, he was a happy dude, and all of us were just shocked to find that he was struggling and had that. So just make sure ACE does work. Please ask and care repeatedly so you don't have to get to the point of escort. That's incredibly important. Don't be afraid to point blank ask your friends if they are planning on hurting themselves. Sometimes they will say yes. And if they do, you are there for them, and be there for them and genuinely care for these folks. And also last, this is my 10-year anniversary of my second life. It's been 10 years ago in this year. So I'm happy, I'm thriving, and there is a way out of it. Once you get in that dark hole, there's always a way up. You can get better. I promise.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off this. So Laura is doing wonderful things. She helps people every single day. She recently promoted and now works as the Chiefs exec. And so just want to make sure that message goes out as we end this. Hopefully it's something you remember. We hear a lot of negative things on the stigma, especially the military aspect, that you won't be able to do things. You're going to be shut down. There are elements, if you're, security forces, do not arm. There are certain things that, might show up later on if you're a specific job, something with your security clearance and things like that. But once, you get your help and things like that, in most cases, you can bounce back. And even if you can't bounce back, we're talking about the decision between your life and your career. There's so many different things you can do. The military sets us up in a lot of different fashions. So if you are intel and you work in a very specific thing and you have some top secret, and that kind of hinders you because you can't do certain things, that's going to open a lot of doors and things when you do happen to get out. And I think the outside understands mental health slightly more than we do. And so don't make that choice just because you're worried about your career and things like that. You can bounce back, you can promote, you can be chief's exec, you can do great things. Laura, if you could finish up here and just kind of walk us through some of the resources. We touched on, friends and a couple different things, but let's just kind of recap the resources if you are having, that low.
Oh, yeah. No, if you're having a low, reach out to your friends. Don't be afraid. They are not going to think, if they're your true friends, they're not going to think you're an inconvenience. You can talk to a random stranger. I mean, look at Forrest Gump. He was sitting on a park bench just talking about his whole life to anybody who would just listen to him or not listen. Just get that out there. Talk to someone. You can go to mental health. Mental health is always there for you. They are quite busy. We do hear that a lot. Mental health is struggling worldwide with the providers and stuff, but do not give up. You are not an inconvenience. Get that help. Be stubborn. Be a pain in the butt. Go get that help. There's the suicide hotline. They'll answer your call. They have online resources. Just a quick Google. They can help you there as well. And also, if you are at that point, go straight to the emergency room and you tell them directly, I am at this point, please save my life.
You also have access to chaplains. Some bases have True North. There's a chaplain that's on call at any given time. If you want that 100% confidentiality, you go that route. There is now the new 911 number for the suicide prevention hotline. So many resources. You got Military One Source and some other things. But just try to start early, start often, start before you need it. It should be more of a proactive thing. And hopefully throughout these conversations, we're getting more used to being able to say, I'm not having a good day, and taking care of that beforehand. That's all I have for today. Thank you for coming on the show, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
This is Mind Matters, where your mind matters, the podcast for love, life, and learning.